Oh, hi. I didn't see you there. My name is Bliss Foster, and today we are going through Rick Owens' 10 Rules of Style, what they were then in 2009, and how they have evolved today. Has Rick kept to these style rules, or has he broken them? What can we learn from Rick's oeuvre by looking at these rules and the 12 years of work that he's had since he made them? We're gonna jump straight in, but if you really love deep dive analyses of the references, storytelling, and artfulness of designer clothes, you have found the right spot. You should subscribe. I also have 3 other deep dive runway analyses of Rick Owens shows specifically. Those are well worth checking out. In 2009, Details magazine hit up Rick Owens to get his 10 rules of style. I don't know if this was a series that they were doing with lots of other designers, but this has become one of the most iconic interviews that Rick has ever done. On Rick's website, they have transcripts of over 230 interviews that Rick has done over the course of his career, and that list doesn't even include all of the ones that he has ever done. The man has done a lot of interviews. This is the one that gets referenced the absolute most. You'll see why in a second. Style rule number 1. I'm not good at subtlety. If you're not going to be discreet and quiet, then just go all the way and have the balls to shave off your eyebrows, bleach your hair, and put on some big bracelets. I mean, yeah, this is one of the style rules that I think is pretty self-explanatory, and it's pretty obvious that this is one of the foundational reasons why we like Rick Owens so much. I don't think he gives himself enough credit about the subtlety thing because there are an enormous amount of subtle details in his work, both in the runways and in the final product that lands in the store, which those two things are essentially the same, which is a rare thing about Rick. If it goes on the runway, it appears in the stores. He's certainly expressed this mentality in different ways throughout his career, but yeah, the super different, extremely noticeable, in your face kind of design, that's sort of what we go to Rick for. It is very sweet that he made the references to the big bracelets because that is most certainly a Michelle Lamy thing, and a cute shout out to his wife is very wholesome. Hey, there's some subtlety right there, a subtle reference to Michelle. Style rule number 2. Working out is modern couture. No outfit is going to make you look or feel as good as having a fit body. Buy less clothing and go to the gym instead. Truly the most well-known Rick Owens quote. There are lots of famous fashion quotes, and most of them have kind of moved into the realm of corniness because they're just sitting in a cursive script in too many people's living rooms. But among fashion nerds right now, this Rick Owens quote, along with the Yohji Yamamoto quote about black, are probably the 2 most well-known fashion-related quotes in existence. And yeah, I mean, this was true of Rick back then. It's definitely true of him now. I mean, his wife has boxed for most of her life. Rick has always really loved working out, and his boyfriend's torso looks like this. Rick likes working out. Let's move on. Style tip number 3. I've lived in Paris for 6 years, and I'm sorry to say that the ugly American syndrome still exists. Sometimes you just want to say, stop destroying the landscape with your outfit. Still, from a design standpoint, I'm tempted to redo the fanny pack. I look at it as a challenge. It's something to react against. I mean, that's fair. Rick is American. I, as a fellow American, can co-sign the concept that Americans dress like shit when they travel. We can actually thank Rick Steves for that, for encouraging everyone to buy those awful nude fanny packs that you're supposed to keep your money in and tuck it into your pants. Y'all, Europeans have such a big problem with pickpockets, y'all. I don't know. I've never had a problem with it. This statement does carry a pretty insightful comment, though, about Rick's stuff, because while he does design plenty of very crazy and over-the-top things, the core of his design does seem to be redefining what the uniform is, and he does make clothes that seem to work perfectly for the I am very comfortable and casual anywhere that I go. The uniform that Rick himself keeps to would be perfectly comfortable on a plane. It would be perfectly comfortable if it was a hot summer in France. These are the kind of clothes that you wear when you're trying to get other people to come up to you to ask for directions, and then you politely inform them that you do not live here. So yeah, some of these will definitely be more complicated than this, but this one I think holds perfectly true. This one was true then, it's true now. Moving on. If you would like to get access to the extended Rick Owens runway analysis episodes, those are only available on the Patreon. I have tons of extended episodes, exclusive episodes to the Patreon, and you get to join the private Discord server where tons of fashion fans are just picking apart collections and talking about the nuances and the artfulness of designer clothes all day long. Also, this is independent fashion journalism. It's my full-time job. If you find this stuff useful, if it is helpful for you, if you feel like you learn a lot, I ask that you please support the channel. Back to it with number 4. When a suit gets middle of the road, it kind of loses me. It has to be sharp and classic and almost 40s. Okay, so a consistent offering from Rick Owens, a perennial item, if you will, has been the suit. That's maybe a little bit of a lesser known thing from him. But yeah, Rick has always made suits. Usually they're sold as separates, like just a suit jacket. And he's constantly toying with the details of them, changing them around, trying to improve them. And this is a really interesting statement here because there is There's a lot to be said about suits in the 1940s. But for our purposes here, we can just look at how the suits tended to be much roomier back then, but had this little nick at the waist so that you could kind of create some shape and some tailoring to it while it is still very roomy. This is much more so than it is now like an event. Suits now, by contrast, are just very skinny. They're very close to the body. 1940s suits also tended to be a little bit longer in the jacket and come down your waist a little bit more, and that detail is reflected in Rick's suits as well. This is a hard statement to respond to, though, because Rick's body of work is so extensive that we can almost certainly come up with tons of examples that contradict what I'm saying even right now. So instead, we are going to go through some Rick suiting anecdotes. Anecdotes. Truly the savior of journalism. I actually went through all of the interview transcripts on Rick's website and searched all of them for anything where Rick might be talking about suiting. One really interesting one was when Alexander Fury was interviewing him in 2017 for New York Times Style, and Rick said, quote, "I'm not going to be who somebody trusts for tailoring over Dior. Even one of my partners for his wedding, he wore Dior." First of all, an interview with East Touch magazine in 2002 asked him, "Have you ever worn a suit?" And Rick said, "Sure, when I was a kid." And then we have a really interesting kind of contradictions. I've always thought that if you have a small, tight shoulder and long, skinny arms, it sets the head off really gracefully. Once you have that, it gets the eye fixed, and then you get an impression of length and grace flowing down from that. It was always about flowing rather than gripping. Now, that was not specifically talking about suiting. He was talking about his shape and silhouette in general, but that does pretty directly contradict what is being said about 1940s suits that would have been very broad. The armholes would have been larger. It's very much not what he's describing here. So this was in 2007. His Rules of Style was done in 2009. And I don't think that contradiction necessarily has to be seen as a contradiction. I think what we can take that to mean is just that when Rick is answering a question for an interview, he is giving you his current thought process about the thing. He's not, as we might have guessed, just trying to outline rules that will then guide his design process for the rest of his life. He is truly trying to rethink things as often as he can. Richard contains a multitude. Style rule number 5. Hair and shoes say it all. Everything in between is forgivable as long as you keep it simple. Trying to talk with your clothes is passive aggressive. That tells us a lot about Rick in 3 sentences. Most designers do have 1 or 2 elements of an outfit that they really hone in and fixate on, but it's interesting that he chose hair because the man naturally has very curly hair, and it's graying obviously because of his age, but he uses a hair dye that he claims he created himself and fights against the curly hair every single day with a keratin treatment, I assume? I don't know. Hair people, help me out in the comments, please. But the statement, trying to speak with your clothes is passive aggressive, that is such an interesting thing for someone to say who creates such brazenly intense clothing. I can only assume here that he's more referring to the fact that he's created a uniform for himself and a lot of other people that can be spiced up with some of what we think of as the crazier pieces in his body of work. Because pretty much as far back as you want to go, Rick has always made big shapes, crazy clothes that do make a very intense statement. So I can only assume that he is self-aware enough here to just be talking about the uniform that he's creating for himself and others. Style rule number 6. There's something a little too chatterboxy about color. Right now, I want black for its sharpness and punctuation. This is incredibly true for the time that he's speaking in. This interview came right at the beginning of Rick's very lengthy black period. When he was first starting out, he had lots of experiments with very interesting colors with a little bit of monochromatic stuff, I imagine, for the buyers. And then around the time of the Larry collection, we saw him re-emerge with some absolutely wild colors. So this is great. We found a contradiction in here, and that, I think, speaks even more heavily to the fact that Rick is not trying to lock himself in and do the same thing for a long time. It's him trying to constantly evolve. Style rule number 7. Jean-Michel Frank, the 30s interior and furniture designer, supposedly had 40 identical double-breasted gray flannel suits. He knew himself and is a wonderful example of restraint and extravagance. This, again, ties us back pretty strongly to uniforms. Some other thoughts about Rick and uniforms is that he is on record saying that he very rarely buys clothes. He seems to be one of the few designers who is designing clothes that are meant to be for him in his own life. Apparently, he oftentimes doesn't even have separate clothes for the gym. He just shows up, takes his sweater off, and then works out. This also says a lot about Rick's fascination with sparseness, not just in his own wardrobe, but in his life generally. He has this incredible quote from an interview a while ago where he said, "After you've showered and brushed your teeth in a marble cube, you're going to aspire to something a little higher. You're going to attempt something more extreme. So that's what I was doing. I was creating an environment for myself that would force me to demand more and demand something better. And I have to be at my very, very best. Truly, the most luxurious thing is to not have a lot of stuff. All you really gotta have is the stuff that's needed to perform at your maximum capacity. Quite a flex. Style rule number 8. I hate rings and bracelets on men. I'm not a fan of man bags or girl bags either, or even sunglasses. I don't like fussy accessories. Isn't it more chic to be free? Every jacket I make has interior pockets big enough to store a book and a sandwich and a passport. I love how it's such a standard now for menswear nerds to talk about pockets in terms of how many sandwiches and snacks can be held. This statement has held true over time as far as the pockets thing is concerned. Rick has definitely leaned much more into accessories as time has gone on. There's a cynical part of me that looks at this and says, well, obviously, because accessories make more money. But I do think that he doesn't just toss accessories out into the world. All of them have been legitimate ways to build on the world that he's already created. I don't think that these are just cash grabs, though they certainly do make him a lot of money. The super tiny $1,800 bunny bag is a great example of this. Is that going to make him a ton of money? Absolutely it will. Does this fit pretty well into the Rick verse? I think it does. Style rule number 9. With layering, sometimes the more the better. When you layer a lot of black, you're like a walking Louise Nevelson sculpture, and that's pretty attractive. Allowing yourself to be vulnerable is also one of the most attractive things you can do. For anybody who doesn't know, Louise Nevelson is an incredible sculptor and has just tons of really, really sick work. And this is a pretty apt metaphor, I think. I think this was well selected. This statement could be seen as a contradiction to his speaking with your clothes as passive-aggressive statement, but I really don't think it's helpful to think of Rick Owens' statements, or really any artist's statements, as contradictions. I think really all we can do is use that to help us learn more about what they're thinking when they're making things. And here we get a treat because he said this thing about vulnerability and how that's so attractive. Rick Owens' entire catalog is very heavily about vulnerability. Everyone who owns anything by Rick has had the experience of getting your first Rick piece and then getting ready to go to the first public function where you're gonna wear it. You have to sort of psych yourself up and do this like, okay, here we go. There will be weird looks, you will get questions. Even for somebody who's really gregarious and extroverted like myself, that's still an intimidating prospect. Especially since I myself tend to go more towards the wilder side of what Rick does. For anybody who's new to that feeling, by the way, it does get substantially easier over time. At this point, my friends and my family just kind of know me as like, oh yeah, that's Bliss. He wears crazy shit. No need to talk about it. He's done that the last 30 times I've seen him. Style tip number 10. It's funny, whenever someone talks about rules, I just want to break them. I recoil from the whole idea of rules. This is the most telling part of the entire list, and it is a nice tidy bow for a listicle. Clearly what he's referring to here is the rules of fashion, but probably more directly here he's referring to the rules that he's just laid out. And as we have talked about in this video, he has broken many of those rules as he's moved on. And you gotta give him credit, because designers who find success early on changing their direction in a radical way, that is a scary proposition. Fashion designers are artists, but they're also business owners, and Rick Owens owns an independent business. Independent fashion companies have one of the most unprofitable business models that exists. It is very, very hard to make money, and if you have locked down a really consistent client base that love what you do, saying something like, okay, well, I know you guys are all here because I do black really well. I'm gonna start doing these crazy colors. You really do risk crashing your entire company when you do something like that. It's easy for anyone who leans towards the creativity side of things to say, oh yeah, I love breaking rules. But if you look at the work of most designers now and even in the past, breaking rules is not a regular thing for them. But yeah, this mentality of always looking for how you can evolve and change and grow yourself as an artist, that's just very, very risky. Breaking rules, especially your own rules, is only for designers with a really strong stomach. And we do love Rick's stomach. Thank you so much for joining me. Follow me on Instagram. Go join up on the Patreon. There is a ton of incredible content to go through on there if you want to learn about the nuances of these clothes that we all love so much. The links are always down in the description. If you're new, subscribe, hit the bell button, all the normal stuff. I love you. Gosh, just so much. Wow. Goodbye.